Thank you for inviting me, and you are totally welcome to be my first groupie. Okay, so this talk will be interesting, I hope. Going into it, I basically started asking myself, how is my work related to language learning? It's I'm going to basically try to make it clear how it is or how I see it related, and then talk a little bit about what I've been thinking more recently about in terms of what gaming is. So it's probably obvious by now. I play a lot of games. I play a lot of video games. I play a lot of board games, role-playing games, all sorts of games, mobile games, and that's what I guess I started going to graduate school to do, to study games and how to make them better to teach people. But anyway, so this is me when I was a kid. Actually, this isn't me when I was a kid. This is only like 10 years ago. This is me when I was a kid. So I don't know if you can see that very well, but I'm the person there in the back running this game of Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't know how popular Dungeons and Dragons is in Korea or Japan. Has any of you played it? A few people, although maybe you're not originally from Korea. But it's so I'm like, I don't know. I think I'm about 12 here, 13, and it's a role-playing game where each person who's playing creates a character to play. So it's almost like an acting game or a theater game, except that character has all these stats and numerical details about the character. So like strength and agility, or not agility, but dexterity, all this stuff. So it's precursor to a lot of the online games that you see these days with stats that keep track of abilities and such. And what's different about this game than most online games is it's controlled by what's called a DM, or a dungeon master, or a game master, and that's what I'm doing. I'm sort of controlling the setting. I'm telling the characters, the players, my brother on the left and two of our friends, where it is that they are, and so them pretending to be their characters are then reacting to that location. But anyway, so that's me when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, I played a lot. My parents would always tell me, "You're wasting your time. Why are you playing video games? Why are you playing role-playing games? You're just wasting your time." I also read comic books. I did a lot of things that I think my parents felt like I was wasting my time. I grew up in the U.S. My parents immigrated from Taiwan. As graduate students, they met each other in graduate school. They got married. They raised me and my brother to basically be doctors or engineers, right? And I went to art school, but that's a different story. So they were convinced I was wasting my time. And I started internalizing that, right? So I grew up thinking that video games were a waste of time. But I didn't care because they were so compelling. So then, I went to art school again, or actually I went to a liberal arts college, but I majored in art. But then afterwards, I started working for this place called OMSI, which is the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. It's in Portland, Oregon. It's a science museum. It's science center. I was in charge of the website and also making games for them, educational games that taught science and math. And suddenly, I realized, so here's some screenshots of some of the games I made. I realized that all this knowledge that I had from growing up playing all these games was actually helping me in my professional career, right? So then I was like, you know what? I didn't actually waste my time. I'm not wasting my time when I play these games. So that leads to me wonder then, okay, what exactly did I actually learn from playing these games? And if I now value all this gaming experience, how can I use that value, this sort of new valuation of this knowledge that I have? So I decided to go to graduate school, and basically learn how to make educational games better. And this is at University of Washington, which is in Seattle, northwest of the U.S. And I was in this group called the Learning and Informal and Formal Environments Center. It was funded by the National Science Foundation. It's basically a partnership between University of Washington and Stanford Research Institute, where all the scholars there, all the professors, all the graduate students, were all studying different ways people learn across a whole bunch of different settings. So at school, at home, on the playground, while playing soccer, while playing games with each other, going to the movies, whatever, going to a science museum. So what does that learning look like, and what connections exist between all those different locations? So learning isn't just the domain of school. We're always learning all the time, right? And we don't just learn when we're kids. We're always learning even as adults, as we grow older. So that's really what the center was about. At that center, I basically began researching World of Warcraft. And a lot of it is because, so I started graduate school in 2003. World of Warcraft came out in 2004. It started consuming a lot of my time. And if I did not write a dissertation on World of Warcraft, then I would have to leave graduate school because it was taking too much of my time. So I started researching the game that I was playing basically as a way to complete graduate school. But I think I did a good job. It isn't just some excuse to play this game. And I guess Jason likes it at least. So I wrote this book, Elite Noobs. I'll talk about that in a sec. Okay, so when the book was heavily influenced by this author, Jim G., or this linguist scholar, education, scholar, James G., you probably know him. I assume you know him. And he was part of this, new literacy studies movement. So when I'm going to just take a few moments to describe what I think literacy is. And a lot of it is heavily influenced by that whole line of research or theorizing. So, literacy, traditional literacy in the US at least, is learning how to read and write. I mean, that's basically the lay person's definition. You can read and write stuff. But it's not actually, I don't actually view it as that, what the definition is. I don't think actually knowing anything counts. And a lot of this is because the way I do research, I try to observe people's behavior. And that means I'm not dissecting their brains and trying to figure out what they know. I'm only paying attention to what they're doing. So to me, literacy is very much a doing something type of act than it is a knowing how to type of thing. And I can talk about this like way longer, but I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll try to bounce back on that in a few more cases in this talk. That doing. So if you then suddenly focus on the doing, so what can you actually observe people doing when they're reading a book, or when they're watching a movie, or when they're playing a video game? What are they actually doing? They're usually not just sitting there and consuming the thing. There's all this stuff going on. They maybe have a cup of coffee next to them. Maybe they're getting some pillows to prop them up while they're watching a movie. Maybe they're with friends in the same room as them and talking about whatever it is that they're watching or playing. There's all this things going on, right? In terms of games, a lot of that sort of the external resources or the context of your play becomes this very material ecology of things that you're sort of interacting with. So the doing, the act of playing, the act of reading, is bound up in all this material context that you find yourself in. It spans cross text and objects and everything, right? So when I wrote the book, I started focusing a lot on expertise. And I tried to I basically was arguing that the players that I was playing with were expert players. And there's this awesome book, Rethinking Expertise, that came about 10 years ago, and it's very much arguing that sort of framework. Expertise is socially defined. You need a whole bunch of people to be able to label you as an expert in order for you to be considered an expert. It isn't just that you know certain things in your head, but it's that within this participatory community, that whole community sort of has somehow figured out who the experts are, and you've been labeled as one of those people. And the only way you can do that is by demonstrating your expertise, right? By doing stuff. So for me, this mirrors actually. I also do a lot of game studies. I think about what is a game, what are games in terms of a cultural phenomenon, maybe 5 years ago, if you were to ask me that question, what is a game? My definition would be very much a game is a system of rules, and we interact with it. Nowadays, I think games are much more social, and the definition of a game for me is much more on the verb side than the noun side, just like for literacy. And games only exist when they're being enacted, when someone's actually playing and interacting with this thing, but then also they're in a particular setting, they're in a context. All that stuff matters. And does the player, him or herself, consider it a game? All that matters. It isn't just this thing that or an artifact anymore. So I really started focusing on verbs, on researching phenomena as verbs rather than as nouns. And there's just some screenshots of books that are influencing my work there. This led to World of Warcraft, studying World of Warcraft and writing this book on the, and I'm gonna, well, maybe I should just ask you, how many of you in here have actually played World of Warcraft? A few? Do you know what it is, or should I describe it? Okay. I will try to describe it. Here's a screenshot of the game. This is ridiculous, right? Like, what the heck is going on here? There's all these bars and charts and buttons and all this information on your screen. And it's just crazy to try to decode, to try to figure out what's going on here. So in essence, it's a game. It's very much like Dungeons and Dragons. You, as a player, you create a character, you play that character. And actually, I don't have very many screenshots of World of Warcraft. I apologize. I could have thrown in more. But so you're basically running around this 3D environment, right? You're controlling this person, and you're running around the screen, right, in the world. And most of the other characters that you see on the screen are controlled by other people, right, at their computers. And so a lot of the gameplay is interacting with these other people. But then you sort of join up with some of them, and you go off and fight monsters. You fight monsters so that you can, when you kill them, they can give you rewards, gold or equipment, and so that you can get more powerful. Every time you kill a monster, you gain what's called experience points. At a certain level of experience points, you can level up, right? This is common in most games. So World of Warcraft essentially is this like massively, as in thousands of people are playing at the same time, millions of people, multiplayer online game. So I'm going to use it as the first case as an example of what counts as literacy, I guess. So this screenshot here is a good example of both definitions, right? The first definition, literacy, as something that you just know stuff. So it takes a while of playing the game and understanding how it works, what all the numbers mean, what all the labels mean, to get to this point, to be able to understand what this screen means, right? So if you go by literacy as knowledge, knowing how to read, knowing how to consume this, this easily falls under like as a new form of literacy, right? Versus like say a textbook. But if you think about the definition I was thinking about earlier as something that you do, this screen actually isn't the default screen that that World of Warcraft gives you. So this isn't me actually. I grabbed this screenshot from the web. Whoever took the screenshot has installed a whole bunch of modifications to the game, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the play of the game happening outside of the game. So you hop on the web and you start searching. You go to certain websites like curse.com, and you're like, I just need to find some sort of modification. And all the modifications are created by other players. I need a modification that'll let me see certain types of numbers all the time. So you install that, and maybe the thing on the right hand side, there's like this a bunch of numbers in columns and a bunch of bars. That's an add-on that this person has installed, or a modification that this person has installed, and it's basically keeping track of these numbers for that person, for this player. But the player, there's sort of like, to me, the verb part of it is this person has had to have gone through a whole bunch of different events of playing, has had to figure out what was needed to be successful, interact with other players to see what's the norm of the group that they're playing with, right? Know which websites to go to download this modification, know what even to search, like what keywords to put in for the search to figure out like how to solve this thing that they wanted to solve, right? All that stuff is like this, you're interacting with all these sort of external things to the game, right? So it's really, for me, gaming is this sort of ecology of resources that you're interacting with, and the ecology only sort of manifests itself through that interaction, through a narration over time of someone's participation with the ecology. I hope that's clear. I don't know if that makes sense at all. A lot of these are things I've just sort of been having it floating in my head. I haven't actually written them down anywhere. But so hopefully that makes sense. And if not, we'll get beer later and talk about it. Another example of just an external resource. So this is basically a 12-page document that lives on the web that details how to defeat a specific monster in the game. And so somebody wrote this, and actually a bunch of people got together and wrote this. So they shared this document with each other, and then they published it on the web. And then a lot of players, when they encounter this monster for the first time or for the 10th time, and they died, 9 times or whatever, they'll go to this website and find this guide and then try to do what the guide suggests to do in order to beat the monster. And again, the game is just more than the game, right? There's all this, there's thousands, millions of websites devoted to World of Warcraft. Maybe million, well, maybe at least thousands. So here's another screenshot. And what's important about this screenshot is these charts. There's these pie charts at the top left. And again, you can see this bar chart sort of at the bottom. Those bars represent certain metrics in the game to keep track of. What's interesting is that the cognition that's going on, the thinking that the memory that people have as they're doing the work that they're doing, isn't just them, right? It's been offloaded to these tools, which is what distributed cognition is all about. So if you're interested in that, go search for distributed cognition. And this is just a clear example of that practice. So more recently, I played this game called The Secret World when it first came out. And then I played it again earlier this year. It's another MMO. So all these, all my World of Warcraft stuff is from about 10 years ago now. My dissertation work was about 2006. So 11 years ago was all my data collection. but the Secret World, so it's much more recent. I played it this year. And again, it's has sort of the same kinds of things that are on the screen. You know, on the bottom left, there's a chat window, so you can talk to other people. At the bottom are buttons for all the different abilities that you have and everything. So if you've played World of Warcraft, you can hop into this game pretty easily because you sort of know how this game works already, right? But what's interesting about the Secret World is there's a bunch of quests in it that like they ask you to do things deliberately, asking you to find answers that aren't in the game in order to figure out how to play the game, right? Or solve certain quests. We'll see if this works. I assume this is yes. This is yes. This is yes. Okay, so just give you a background.
Piece of junk. We got business to be getting on with, you and I.
And actually, I'm gonna turn this down a little bit while I describe what's going on. So it's really dark, but you know, so this person, this is a cutscene. This, you know, a player is talking to this in-game character, and then later on, you can see some of how the game is played. You know, I'll show you. So this person is controlling this character, running around the 3D world. You know, they've got sort of a window here of their inventory and stuff, and chat window. You know, you can interact with the world and everything. You've got action buttons and everything down here. See my mouse, right? Yeah. And there's certain objects in the game that you can click on. You have certain objectives in the game and quests that you're trying to figure out. One of the quests.
I imagine it's gonna happen. I'm sure if I want to. Duct tape. Wait.
Okay.
Of the required items. Okay.
So this is a recording by somebody on YouTube.
What's the third part?
This on YouTube.
The radio mast should be operational again. Now listen for the signal that Hill was trying to find. No. My God. Okay. Trusty pen and paper. Transmission was in Morse code. You'll need to decipher the message behind it. My God.
Okay, so the game basically just asks this player to translate that Morse code. And most players in the U.S. don't know Morse code. I didn't know Morse code, even though I tried to learn it in Boy Scouts. And if you listen to that again, it's just kind of ridiculous, right? Like, to expect someone to be able to... Does anyone here know Morse code?
I'm going to assume that's Morse code.
Okay, so so if the game was just the game, right? There's no way you'd be able to solve this quest because you don't know how to decode the Morse code, right? So what's interesting about the Secret World is there's a built-in web browser, and so you don't even have to Alt-Tab. You don't have to hop over to Google Chrome or Firefox or whatever. You can stay within the game and open up a web browser and search the Wikipedia article for Morse code or whatever you want, and which is what she's done.
No. For the coded transmission, if you... I'm...
Right? So she's like basically Googling different places to look up how to translate Morse code. So I'll go back to my to the presentation. Oh. The Morse code. So no one in here, no one raised their hand when I asked if you could solve Morse code, right? Because if you can, you should tell us what it means right now. No one? Okay, so I was playing this game, right? So I got to this quest also. I hopped onto Wikipedia and I tried to figure out what was going on. So Wikipedia has this nice, it tells you an A, so it's English, right? Or it's Roman alphanumeric characters, right? So A is a dot dash, so it's like D, right? That's A. So B would be dash dot dot dot, so it would be D, right? So then if you know this and then you try to listen to this thing, then maybe you can solve it, right? But it's just ridiculous. Try listening to this thing again. It's going way too fast. So what's a person to do, right? So me and it turns out a bunch of other players sort of followed a particular way of solving this puzzle, which is, and here's a close-up of the Morse code. Use an audio player like Audacity to show you a visual representation of the audio that you're hearing. So I played, while I was playing the game, I recorded the game as I was playing it, and I threw it into this sound recording software editor called Audacity. And now you can see, you can see that there's clear marks where there's sound and where there's no sound, right? And it follows the same pattern. So this first letter here is a dash dot dot. If you look over in the key here, that's a D, right? And the next letter is an R dot dash dot dot. And then the next letter is 3 dashes, which is an O. And so on. So that's how I solved this puzzle. It's just kind of crazy to think that a game developer would even design this thing into their game. Like it's completely unlike any other role-playing game that's come out before it. And it's asking players to go and do this thing from outside of the game and engage in resources outside of the game to then solve the puzzle in the game. And actually, I don't know what the success rate for this quest. This quest isn't one of the necessary ones. You don't have to complete this quest to continue with the game. So I don't know how many players actually did this. But enough players did this, often enough, that some of them wrote to the answer and just threw the answer on the web. So if you play this, you could just Google, what's the answer to this Morse code thing for this specific quest in this game, and you'll get the answer. Which I would suspect probably a lot of players now do. But so, the Secret World has a bunch of these types of things in it. There's artifacts, items, objects you can find in the game that have URLs in them. So like this person's email is emilychan@orochigroup.com. And orochigroup.com actually exists. You can Google it right now. So it's out there. And there's all these cryptographs and everything. I open up a text editor. I have to try to solve what those words are. There's maps, in-game maps with locations marked, and sometimes you have to import them into Photoshop and draw on them to figure out where the next clue is going to be. There's all these really interesting things going on in this game. So the third example of this material resource stuff is Dungeons and Dragons. So going back to that screenshot, or not screenshot, but a photograph of me playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? So these days, Dungeons and Dragons is mediated through a lot of digital technologies. So there's a website that you can go to. There's apps you can download. And here's a mock-up of somebody's perfect ideal gaming table. There's an iPad for each player. There's the computer over on the left that's sort of helping the DM do their DMing stuff. And then here's somebody else's setup. They have a projector projecting onto the table, so you can draw maps and things like that, or project maps. It's just very interesting, right? Okay, so I just made this case that literacy is this material doing stuff rather than just knowing something. But that doesn't actually, if you think about it, so now let's think about it. I'm not actually saying anything about games, or I haven't yet. And I basically just made a case that literacy is this material thing, but I really focus on games. So why do I focus on games? So what are games? And I'm going to blow through this. These are things that I have been working on for a couple of years now, really quickly. So games to me are two things. The first thing is their systems. They're systems of rules, or systems of constraints, if you want to call it that, or simulations of a particular world that has certain rules in place, and you as a player has to figure out what those rules are in order to be able to be successful in the game, right? So just some examples. This is XCOM. I'm just going to blow through these examples really quickly. So this is XCOM. I won't actually talk about them. There's The Division, which is a first-person shooter set in New York. Here's Settlers of Catan. You know, there's sort of a language or a pattern to how these games are played, and the more you play games, the more you start recognizing patterns in other games, and what that means is you become more and more familiar with different types of rules that games have and everything, right? Here's Civilization 6. And again, I mean, the screenshot is just as messy as the World of Warcraft one. Like, you have no idea what's going on here if you've never played the game. Here's EVE Online, which is, some people have called spreadsheets in space. The second thing that games are stories. And this is the reason why I play games. I really like the narrative that games represent. I like, you know, hearing about characters in these fantasy situations and trying to figure out what they learn, I guess, what their story is, and what that narrative is like for them, and then actually being a part of that and affecting the outcome somehow. So some good examples of these types of games: Gone Home, which is really good, The Walking Dead, The Banner Saga, Cart Life, which is about, basically, you control a person who's trying to run a successful food cart or a coffee cart, but you might be homeless, or you might be a single parent. It's a really depressing game, actually, about trying to deal with poverty and get out of it. Papers, Please. So these games, you know, systems and stories, right? If that's true, so what does that mean? So understanding systems, and this is from Ralph Koster's Theory of Fun. He claims that basically to play a game well means you're recognizing patterns in a particular noisy setting. And that means you're learning something. And he equates that to fun. You could apply the same sort of logic to making meaning out of stories. You're basically finding patterns in these meanings, in these stories, right? So you're relating to events and certain characters and such. And you're able to connect those experiences with each other, and you're learning something, right? So the ability to make meaningful choices in systems, so you understand these patterns well enough so that you know what to do next, right? And then making meaningful stories is the ability to see connections between events, right? Are basically definitions of agency and empathy. So again, agency, the ability to make meaningful choices. Empathy, ability to make meaningful connections. So for me, when you play a game, you really believe you have a say. You have some sort of imagined future that you're working towards, and that makes it a hopeful type of situation. You think the world that you're playing in can be better, and so that's what you're trying to do. You're gonna make the thing better. So you believe in that future, right? But what is that future that you believe in? And we make these connections when we play to the systems that we're playing with and to the different players that we play with or to the different characters that we encounter in the game. We're making these connections. What we decide to do with them isn't dictated by the game. It's dictated by us, our values, our value system. So it's not just our future, but it's like everyone's future, right? You're not just dealing with your own future as you play a game. You're dealing with the world's future. And that means that we have this choice. Do we play a selfish game where we only care about our outcome, or do we play this collective game where we care about everyone's outcome? And I'm choosing the latter, which basically means that games aren't just about agency and empathy, at least not for me. They're also about compassion and trying to find that compassion with other people. Or games should be about that. And we should be trying to get people to play that way. To play that way means that you have to always constantly be analyzing what you're playing and analyzing, trying to suss out whether you're playing ethically, right? Whether you're playing compassionately, whether you're playing in a way that benefits everyone or benefits the overall, I guess, narrative of the story, right? Of the outcome. So choices do matter, our values matter, right? So that means that, to be critical in everything, to understand patterns, to make connections with other people, that to me is what gaming is, what gaming literacy is. And these are things we should always be doing, not just in games. Especially in a democratic society, we need to always be questioning authority. We need to always be questioning the rules that are in place, whether they're dumb, whether we should be following them or not. We need to always basically be gaming everything. And that's me. And this is the site I run, esotericgaming.com. And I thank you for having your ear.